You know, Galen, you asked me, the questions you sent were so thoughtful, and I realized that last time we spoke, I really kind of was going on a flow after a
Mm,
series of questions. So I want to make sure. I mean, I know we ended up covering some of the territory that you specified in questions, but there are other very good questions that you had sent me as well, and I want to make sure that you have, you're able to ask those questions that you'd already focused on as well.
oh, thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I know you yourself are just looking for this. Yes, um, you're yourself interested in features,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, is it indie features? I'm curious, indie features or studio based or all of the above?
Well, a little bit of all of the above. I mean, I am it's a funny thing. I keep like in my own writing, I tend to write big, with an indie mentality. And, uh, and so I think that, is not like, it's like, I'm always trying to, like contain things and write things smaller, and then I end up going bigger and bigger and bigger. Um, which,
But what do you mean
doesn't
by
serve.
what do you mean by bigger? Do you mean longer or do you mean a bigger canvas or
No, I
can you
go
give
for
me a,
spectacle. I go
oh,
for
spectacle? Oh, wow.
like like I always like I think of so in writing. So in the movies that I've been hired to write, it's like you've got 12 characters in to like there's parameters to work with, or
Right.
certain locations or something like that. And um but even then, like, I wrote, so I've written two romantic comedies that are Hallmark-esque, and but in them they were full of stunts. Like like I had all these.
That is unusual. That is. But that's it sounds like that's one of your gifts that you have that creative thought process that these things come up for you, right?
Yeah, like I'm in love with physical comedy, and I love, like, so I love Preston Sturges films, and I love, like,
Oh yeah.
uh
Okay.
Buster Keaton films. And I think that, like, so I'm always trying to write like gags, like physical gags and stuff like that. That I'm immediately drawn to that kind of thing. So one script that I've written that was that's opened some doors for me is just it's a dark comedy, but there's, all kinds of big physical things happening that I know are not easily contained into an indie world. All that to say, like, I love independent film, and uh, I love, big Hollywood blockbuster stuff, but I tend to write uh, independent films that have much more spectacle, and I need to. This is something I'm learning, that I need to be able to contain myself, and like contain things to smaller budgets and stuff like that.
Oh, I see. In thinking in terms of budget.
Yeah,
Yes. I see. But you know what? When you're writing that first draft, um, you don't have to worry about budget with that first draft.
yeah,
You really don't. I mean, you have your own screenwriting teachers, but I know so many of my students are very concerned about can they even use music without rights? And I said, this is, this is the wide open West. You put whatever you want into that first draft that you think serves the characters and serves the story.
yeah,
And then with the subsequent draft, then you further, discern what is your major focus in that,
yeah.
and what is distracting, or what
Mm,
is supporting, or what is even a little maybe revealing or really kind of entertaining or surprising in an unexpected way.
mhm,
I'm a great believer in the process of the process,
yeah,
and you don't censor yourself before you have to.
yeah.
I think that's the big thing. Don't, because of course you will have many, many cooks that are stirring your broth.
Yeah.
Let me put it that way. I mean, before you sell it, and then if you sell, when you sell it, oh yes, indeedy, you know, between the network, the studio, etc., you know, and then once you actually get to production, then there's the director and sometimes the acting talent as well.
Mhm.
Sometimes you're on a little bit earlier if it's their production company. So I think it's really important to, I guess, to honor the serendipity
Yeah.
and the expansiveness of your voice, and then you shape with the less is more. And
Yeah.
usually the less is more is just that discernment of what is furthering the real power of your
Mm.
story as opposed to distracting from it, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Well, I
What?
was curious because the
Oh, please.
reason I asked, oh, you were going to ask me something,
No, no,
Galen?
no. Go on, and
Well,
I'll ask
just
you.
because you're interested in features, I mean, clearly the work of mine that you know is all television, but I've actually written um, 5 features, and
Oh,
the first one was strict, you know, it was that it was that first it was that first um, student script. I mean, I wasn't enrolled in school at the time, but I would call it. But I mean, but it had its own canvas. So and I was thinking of it as an indie feature, and then and then I did those several television MOWs that we talked about before that got me into the guild and got me some important agents. Um, but then I also did the scripts that I'm going to share with you. 2 of them that I did that might be interesting process for you is Tin Wife, which was a book that I was hired to adapt by a small production company that was led by
uh-huh.
a former ICM agent. And that actually, I got that assignment um, 4 months into my Cagney and Lacey job.
Oh, really? Oh, excuse
Yeah,
me. Sorry,
so
one second.
that's
Sorry,
okay.
one second. Um. Okay. Sorry about that. Sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay. One of the producers had recommended me to this executive, and so I ended up writing 2 drafts of that over my first on weekends and the brief breaks we had um, over my first year and a half at Cagney and Lacey. Um, and it was an adaptation based on a best-selling and critically respected book that was written by a Village Voice writer. And then the company that had hired me it started to go through a kind of dissolution process. And
Uh-huh.
so this is hard to believe, but this is the way it was explained to me. They forgot to pick up the option on the option date. So 20th Century Fox bought the book because there had been a competitive bidding on the book itself.
Mhm.
And so, I thought, well, that's the end of that script, which is too bad because um, the producer or the executive had paid for me to go to New York and go to Brooklyn. I'd never been to Brooklyn before and do the research on the background of this story. It's a story of a police widow, you mentioned it, who is trying to get justice with the NYPD in terms of her husband's pension. He, in fact, did not did not get killed in the line of duty. He died in his mistress's bed. So there was a series of cover-ups.
Ooh.
And the book took place entirely on one day,
Okay.
the whole book. And so when I was hired, the mandate was uh, bring out the story. We need a full narrative of this. It
Mm.
can't just, it was all in her head. It was all
Oh.
in her head. The last day she saw him, and then the uncovering of the truth, and the meeting with the mistress, and they're uniting together to deceive the NYPD, the powers that be, etc. Also, her daughter could get this pension and go across the bridge to Manhattan. So it's really about the family wanting to escalate, well, the mother, the widow, and give her daughter opportunities that she'd never had because she was a
Mm.
housewife who'd married right out of high school and so on. So it was a really, really interesting story. And they'd had some major actresses in mind when we first talked about it. So I'll just flash forward to, gosh, 10 years later. And by that point in time,
Well,
three
were you
different.
taken off the project? Were you taken off the project when with it?
Sure. After
Yeah.
Fox bought it, because the company that hired me no longer owned the option on it. So they bought it for a writer director they had under one of their studio deals.
Uh-huh.
So over the next 10 years, my understanding is that at least 3 different studios owned the project at different times. They invested in for their writer directors or some other talent. But I check in every periodically. The author had actually died shortly before I was hired to write it. He died very young. So his widow owned the rights. But I had met the agent who, or at least by phone, who had represented the rights. So the shorthand is I kept thinking I would love to get this made. And so finally I did. I was able to go back and finally persuade the widow to allow me to get the option on the book. She gave me a free option while I shopped it around. I also had to go back and get the rights to my script because the company that had hired me to write it had now dissolved, and another company had taken over all of their products. This happens not uncommonly in the industry. And so I got it made as a USA cable movie in 1998. And Ann Archer, an Oscar nominee who still had some clout at that point, was signed for the lead. And we shot that with USA Universal Productions, and we shot it in Vancouver. There are a couple of my projects I did in Vancouver. So there was that. The other deal I'm going to share with you, which is more typically a feature deal, and it was just a really interesting project. It was through Universal, and this was brought to me by my agents at CAA. And there were 2 actresses production companies involved. They both had deals on the Universal lot at the time with Universal Pictures. One was Jessica Lange's company, Prairie Films, and the other was Cher.
Oh,
indeed, yes, Cher.
wow.
And that's what I thought. Wow, that's a really interesting pairing. And Cher's film company at the time was called Isis Productions.
Okay.
And I never met with either of the 2 actresses. I met with the head of their production company. And I'm trying to think of Lynn's last name, who was head of Prairie Films, but it was Bodan Zachary, who was head of Cher's company. He later went on to become a vice president of the PBS station here in Los Angeles.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, we reconnected, I don't know, about 10, 12 years ago, because he was doing a program on authors and book reviews and so on. And so he left the industry at a certain point. So this is what I will say. I had good support from both of those companies, which isn't always the case. They brought me 3 words, 2 50s, well, actually 2 words and one set of numerals. Why should you do a story about 2 50s housewives or 2 housewives in the 1950s, right? And so what happens is that I'm sure they went to a number of writers that they were auditioning, asking them to bring in stories. This is how, by the way, when you become a member of the Writers Guild, this is what the Writers Guild wants to protect its members from as much as possible, which is doing a lot of free pitches and giving away their intellectual property, in a sense, by doing those pitches. But I knew I was being auditioned. This is when I had my deal with the Rosenzweig Company. So it was just as I was moving on to the Weintraub Company. So it was in like 89, 90, around there through the 91. So this deal unfolded over a period of about probably a year and a half, 2 years. while I was also doing my pilots
Mm.
and working on these other companies, and also serving an executive to develop other pilots with other writers. So I had a two draft deal, and then they were to determine if they would pick me up for the third draft. So, and I met because these were, major actresses. My meetings for development notes were with the president of Universal Pictures, Sean Daniel, at the time,
Wow.
and who had a beautifully appointed office with all craftsman furniture. And I mean, I remember a great discussion between himself and several other executives about it. And I was learning just about, different kinds of furniture, because he had a huge office, right? But I will say he was supportive. And I actually had met him through one of my advocacy organizations called Hollywood Women's Political Committee.
Okay.
And so we had met at a number of events. We shared certain, let's say, political values, which
Mhm.
was not a bad thing, so we kind of spoke the same language. But this was a kind of dark comedy that they brought me. This was not a serious drama.
Oh, really?
It was unlike anything that they had seen me write. So what they were looking for was something that was kind of a mixture of this kind of a dramedy, but with some dramatic overtones, because what they wanted to see with each of these women, the 1950s housewife, and imagine the cliche of stereotype of what that is, go through an individual transformation.
Mm.
So the shorthand of it is Confessions, refers to the magazines called True Confessions. These True Confession magazines, which I think were essentially fiction, but were supposed to be true stories. In the 50s, I had a researcher who was finding all these amazing magazines for me, and I'd go through them. And so Cher's character became a secret True Confessions writer. And what she was doing, true to form, as trying to think, this very famous writer who's often quoted, Joan Didion, who says,
Oh.
a writer will sell you out every time. Not necessarily, but the point is, she was doing her investigation among her friends to look for likely stories. And Jessica Lange character was one of her friends. So it really is a story of this kind of subterfuge and subversive approach, because both of their marriages are in trouble, but one is a nascent career woman, and the other is just kind of lost in her image of who the perfect 1950s woman is, and how she needs to act and perform and so on. And of course, they were both mothers. So it was fun to write. And so one week we got the good news that Sean was pleased with the second draft. I was being picked up for the third draft, a new deal. And a director named Frank Oz had already signed on for the project. Now, I don't know if you know Frank's work, but he has
absolutely.
He has a really interesting history, because he started as a puppeteer, as you know, with the Muppets. I had actually, one of my first articles for American Film Magazine was visiting the Muppet set. So I actually remember seeing him, I guess I interviewed him briefly, but he would have no idea who I was. But he committed to the script. He didn't know, I'm sure he didn't know who I was, other than at that point, people knew me as a writer producer of television. So he committed to it. A meeting was being scheduled with Sean and his execs, and Frank. And by the way, they gave the notes that I would receive on each draft was like 4 to 5 pages long. It was very, very specific. It was per scene. And I have, I never worked with Paramount on features. I'm not sure if this is true with all feature companies, but I do know that I could feel that it was a much different experience for a feature writer because I was going in there strictly as a writer, as opposed to that writer-producer hyphenate, which
Mm.
carries a level of prestige and respect in the television industry. I think I was fortunate that I was dealing with the execs I was dealing with. And then a few days before I was supposed to go in for this third draft, I got the call from my agent that, oh, so sorry, but Jessica Lange wanted another writer on the project.
Oh.
And I said, oh, really? And she said, yes, Cher's company, Bodan, they're very happy with it. But for some reason, this is like some of the standard language is, want to see another take on it. I want to see
Mm.
another take on it. Well, okay. My contract essentially was finished. And so, and then, so I said, well, who do you think will pick it up? I mean, I knew from a writer skill standpoint, the fact that I had done, it was my original idea. I had done the first two drafts for story treatment, etc. That I had an excellent chance and a very likely chance of having one of the credits on it, right? And she said, well, they're looking to bring Anne Spielberg on. Now,
Oh,
I don't know if you know Anne Spielberg's work, but she wrote Big.
okay.
Yeah, and yes, she is Steven Spielberg's younger sister.
Okay, I was wondering what the relation was. Okay, yeah.
Yes, indeed. And so this was, and in fact, I did meet with Steven Spielberg's executive and met him. The president of his company was Kathleen Kennedy at the time. He had several bungalows on that Universal lot and his own chef. The chef prepared us, lunch. That was a memorable lunch there. And so essentially, but at that meeting, I was pitching pilot ideas. And I think that happened a couple of years after this project. I have to look at the exact sequence. But so in a sense, I was, well, if I have to be rewritten or another writer brought in, which often happens with features, at least I know she's a very good writer. She was one of the writers on Big, and she's Anne Spielberg. So I would think that this has a good chance of being made.
Yeah.
And she did a couple drafts, but it still was not greenlit. It was never greenlit. And I remember I talked to my agent about that afterwards. I mean, I was disappointed. I'm sure Anne Spielberg was disappointed, and my agent said, well, there are just so few features with female leads that are being greenlit. They're just not sure that women, two women without major male leads can carry the story.
Wow.
And somewhere around there also, Cher's company, I think, dissolved. I think it was shortly before she did Moonlighting, because I know Bodan was no longer involved with her company. But I think Lange had her company for a few more years. So, so it's still sitting and, back there in the files of Universal somewhere. Yeah. So that was my third experience as a feature. Oh, and the fourth one was a feature that, it's only been seen by a handful of people because it is an adaptation of the first novel that I wrote. I've written 3 novels now, and this first novel called Angels in the Snow was inspired by the 1983 LA Mr. Goodbar investigation. It was an investigation into a woman's death after a one-night stand in Beverly Hills. And yes, cocaine was one of the characters in this story. It was a very tragic story because the young woman died apparently of a cocaine overdose, but it also appeared that she might have been beaten. Although the man who was with her swore that he was just trying to give her
CPR.
CPR, thank you. CPR, right. And so there was a lot of coverage in the LA Herald Examiner in particular. And the reason it was a tragic story, also representative of, the go-go 80s
Mhm.
and, the excess of Reagan's America. Um, but the young man who was with her was actually a friend of my husband's.
Oh, really?
Yes, I would say a colleague is a better word, but
Mm,
my husband worked for a company right out of college called Jeffries Banknote Company.
okay.
And it was at the time, it was a highly respected printing engraving company. It was the
Mhm.
largest west of the Mississippi that had been founded by my husband's grandfather many years before. And the one of the uncles had actually sold the rights to the company, but there were several family members that were still involved. And so that was my husband's first job out of college, learning sales and marketing and all of that. And Jeff, the tragic young man involved in this, Jeff Parker, was a business colleague. And we had met him at parties. And he actually was somebody who was always trying to get into the entertainment industry,
Mm.
and was trying to get scripts set up and productions and all of this. Just very, interesting character. So 2 months after he was, grand jury decided to bring him to trial, and a few days before he was actually going to go to trial, he was shot to death on his mother's doorstep.
Oh.
Yeah. And so that surprised us, and it saddened us because I think the level of his accountability, I have some opinions on that.
Mhm.
What I discovered in terms of some of my investigation was that actually he had been dealing cocaine after the company had let him go, as they say. So he had developed a cocaine habit himself. This
Mhm.
is the 80s, and then apparently he was dealing with some major names,
Mm.
and I mean major names with white shoe reputations, as they call, white shoe law firms or old
Oh.
LA firms and so on. And so for many years, no one knew who was responsible for his death. So shortly before all this unfolded, I had read Truman Capote's In Cold Blood,
Mm.
and I thought that was such a fascinating story of investigation. So before Jeff died, I had visited him in jail, had a couple meetings with him. Um, and then this unfolded. And so the book went on, and then within a couple months, I was hired on Cagney Lacey. So the book just went on the back burner. But ultimately, I did write the book in between other projects, and it took a long, it was like over a period of a decade, and then and I did have actually 3 different agents for it at different times. I had a small LA agent in the beginning, and then I got and then I don't know if you know the name Mike Ovitz, but he
Oh,
was
yeah.
a
Yeah.
major player, right? And he I mean, I was with CAA, and then he started his own firm called AMG in the early aughts, around '02, '03, I guess, around there. And so I became one of their clients, and his literary agent represented the book.
Mm.
And then a New York agent read it, and she took it out. The shorthand of it is that over a period of a half a dozen years, I had 3 agents, and it went to a number of publishers, and we came close, but it was never set up.
Oh.
So I went ahead and wrote an indie feature script based on it. It's very noir,
Yeah.
I mean, the 80s is a character, LA is a character, very noirish. But I really only showed it to a couple of people because it just hasn't seemed a current project at this point. So, but that was my 4th feature. So
Mm.
that's my experience in the feature world. So, and it is interesting because that one feature that was once imagined as a big studio picture ultimately became a cable movie,
Uh,
right? Yeah.
yeah.
And then the third one, very typical of the business, could have been a major movie with major stars, but never got made. Very typical. The fourth one is based on my own intellectual property, because I had several experiences with books that I was brought in to adapt, or I optioned myself to adapt. Your Blues Ain't Like Mine was one of those for Showtime. And then because I knew the author of Your Blues Ain't Like Mine, um, it was recommended to production, but the year it was recommended to production, I might have mentioned this before, they had just greenlit a project written by, based on a Maya Angelou book. And at that point, the thought was, oh, you can only, you can only produce one Black project per year,
Wow.
which was really so short-sighted because of the three major characters in the book. One is multiracial African American, the other is a white woman, and the other is a white man who's a newspaper editor. But because it was a fictionalized story, or let's say interpretation of the Emmett Till killing, it was considered a Black project.
Wow.
So a number of years after that, I actually got the option back on that book. I tried for at least 10 years to get it set up at different places. And I think you probably have one of the written by articles based on that. It just, at the time, I think people were scared of doing it. And now I think there'd be a lot of attention to it, but
Yeah.
but I no longer have the option on it, and it should, and Showtime still owns my script. That's the thing. See, if you don't own your intellectual property, right? So I can anytime. Well, for instance, the latest, one of the two latest pilots I've written. It was an original. I mean, this was several years ago because was not in the pilot writing business for a time, and then there was a story that came forth for me that I wanted to write. So I wrote it as a pilot. We took it out some places. I had a new agent at that point. We're trying to get a package on it. It didn't happen. It was my attorney. My attorney was really helping lead this. This was after I got to USC. And let me tell you, I was not an active player in the industry as I had been. Very active player for so many years. I mean, I was still doing an occasional cable movie or script here or there, but I was no longer, I wouldn't, all those years were, it was really, really amazing how when you become in the forefront um, of people's minds because you're doing so many projects and you're also doing projects that have a high visibility or they get critical and or commercial acclaim. Many executives will keep knocking on that same door. Are you available to do this? Can you do that? Can you do that? And so no matter how prolific any of us is, and how much we would love to do so many things, there are a lot of times that you say no. And then it's very, or at least I did. And I know that this is how the industry works. But then when you're no longer doing something very active that has this really strong critical or commercial success, it's like, there's a very short attention span in this industry, Galen, a very, very short attention span. So, so the moral of this story is that when you're hot, you develop as many relationships as you can. But we also know that you never write to trend, because if you ever try to write to trend, you're already behind the trend, right? You're already late to the party. So the key is to keep listening to your own voice, take those creative risks, which I think I always did as a writer. And I think sometimes that served me very well. Other times, some people might say, oh, well, maybe you were venturing out in certain areas when Well, for instance, CA kept wanting me to do series, more series, more series. The offers were always coming in. I did 12 pilots alone between 1985 and 1995. That's a lot of pilots because I'm
Wow.
often working on 5 different series at different times. So, but my children were growing older. I wanted to spend more time with them. I also had the experience, again, like all of us in the business. So many pilots get made and they don't get greenlit,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And so they may be aired as a backdoor pilot as an MOW, which happened for one of my MGM pilots called, let's see, it was originally called Shenandoah, and then it aired It's for Love and Glory. I took my name off of that one because, and I sent you one of those articles, because we started with really high ambitions. This was at ABC. Is that right? Or was this one? No, this one was at CBS. We had, yeah, I had seen a series called Upstairs, Downstairs, a rerun of it, which was a British series, which was really about the caste system. I'll call it the class system is a better way in Britain. And I wanted to write about the class system in the Old South,
Mm.
pre-Civil War and during the Civil War, because I always felt, Gone with the Wind was such a incredible production, but the story itself was very romanticized, right?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to see the full spectrum. I wanted to see, not just the idealized, wealthy Southern cavaliers of the plantation class. I wanted to see the sharecroppers. I wanted to see the poor whites upon whose backs, as well as the slaves, this whole system was based on.
Mm.
So that's how I wrote. That's what I pitched, and that's how I wrote my
Yeah.
first 2 drafts. And then I was meeting with the CBS exec, and he said, we're finding it a little serious. And I thought, well, yes, the Civil War was a very serious event. Our country was split asunder. And so he was giving me all these notes. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to be dynasty and hoop skirts. Oh my God, this is
Oh,
just
wow.
the whole opposite of what I wanted to do. And I was so excited about doing it. So I had a deal at MGM. And I went to talk to the president of MGM at the time. It was David Gerber. He was at he'd been in the business for, I don't know, probably 40 years by the time I had to deal with him. And I said, David, I just don't think I can deliver what they're looking for. I don't think you'll be happy with it because it's not what I pitched. And he said, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I said, it was the first time I ever said this. I said, if you want to bring on another writer, you bring on another writer, but I can't give them what they want on this. Well, I knew I could say that because I had a 2-year deal with him. He would make sure I kept working for him. He would give me another project to work on,
Yeah.
right? Which he did. So once I stepped off the project, then he assigned me a TV movie that had been developed for NBC with Shelley Long, and it was based on a book called, let's see, what was the name of the original book? Well, it aired as Fatal Memories.
Okay.
Yeah, and the book was a memoir, a really tragic story, piece of nonfiction, and it was originally called Sins of the Father, and it had been a bestseller. And it was, it was based on a really tragic story of a young child's death, and then the the best friend of the daughter growing up later accusing her father of being responsible for her best friend's death. And so her story, her book made national news. It was a major trial. And so MGM had bought the book. I had nothing to do with their purchasing the book. I'd been working on my first pilot under my deal with them, and then working on the second pilot. The first pilot, by the way, was about a bounty hunter called LA Woman. It was a story of a female bounty hunter, a widow, who was a bounty hunter in LA. And I really enjoyed writing this because I went downtown and I found well, of course, I did a lot of research. And so I was directed to a bail bondsman, very well known. His last name was King, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
The African American community. He was very forthcoming, and he put me in touch with one of his. He had a bounty hunter team, a man and a woman who worked together, and she had originally gone to jail on a drug charge when she was with her former boyfriend. But what was really interesting to me was that she was a single mother. And I had already written my script, and it was about a single mother. Only my mother was widowed. I mean, my character, right, was widowed. She had 2 children. And this real life bounty hunter, she was no longer married, but she had a male partner. And I remember, I'm trying to remember Mr. King's first name. He said, "Oh, they're a great team. They're a great team. So they'll tell you what it's like." And so, I rode with them on certain calls. And then they directed me to a bounty hunters convention in Vegas, which was one of the most interesting things I've ever done. See, this is the beauty of being a writer, Gail.
Yeah.
This is the beauty of being a writer. You get to enter these fascinating worlds, and meet these really intriguing people. And just open your whole frame of mind, and just open to what their stories are and how how their stories came to be. So anyway,
And you seem particularly adventurous in your seeking out of these stories.
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean,
it is. I'm like, as soon as this interview is over, I'm gonna Google the bounty hunter convention in Vegas and find out a way to go if they're still doing it.
I don't even know if they're still having it. I actually did Google it a few years ago, trying to find something. I couldn't find anything. But this was it was at the Mirage Hotel, which is it's great that it was at the Mirage Hotel. And what I still remember is that it was just smoke everywhere. Everyone was smoking. I don't know if they were all packing. I don't remember that part. Probably where it was Vegas, right? But they were there, my two sources, because I interviewed her partner as well. But that wasn't picked up. That wasn't picked up by NBC. And I think that was the year. That may have been the year when one of the execs said, "Georgia, we didn't order any pilots with female protagonists this year." I mean, so I'll just segue to that, because for many years, I did not think the fact that I was a woman would at all endanger my success in the business. Or I just felt it's all about doing the work and developing my talent. I truly believe that. Even though you're trying to find that one essay about, there were times early on when I was pitching, and I'd go into a room and people would be expecting to meet George Jeffries, because they would be, especially the military stories that I'd write. Oh, they was like, what a surprise! That really, Georgia? You're not looking like what I thought you would look like, but that's okay. We'll continue having the meeting, and that's fine. I got in the room, so I never took that personally, because I was just thrilled that they were appreciative of the writing of the story, and when you're starting out, wherever you can learn, that's what I wanted. I just wanted to learn from.
And you were on. It seems like a lot of female-driven things. I mean, you're on Cagney and Lacey. You're on China Beach. See, and I imagine there had to have been more women in those writers' rooms than other shows, your typical 80s thing.
Well,
so
this is what I wanted to say. In a sense, you've heard this cliched expression, well, I didn't choose this, it chose me, or I didn't choose to be a writer, the writing chose me. I did choose to be a writer, but I will say that the universe brought me opportunities that I did not consciously seek out. As I mentioned to you, I had never seen Cagney and Lacey. Before this BBC producer suggested I send in one of my scripts to the series, there were opportunities that came to me that I now feel I don't feel that they were coincidental at all. I feel it was synchronistic
Yeah.
because it was calling me to write stories that I had. Uh, I think I had some talent to approach
Mm.
based on my experience as a young woman, but also based on my interest. I like writing about brave, adventurous people who buck the system.
Yeah.
And I will also say to you that I did come to be aware of over time that as a woman in the industry, I was not only a numerical minority
Mm.
in the Writers Guild, because when I became a member of the Writers Guild in the 80s, this is the early 80s, I found out that I think there were only like 20% of the guild were women. In the 20s, it was actually like closer to 20 or 25%. But
Wow.
you may not know that and I learned this through the years and reading like a biography of Frances Marion, who was once the highest paid screenwriter in the business, a woman,
Mm.
because she partnered with Mary Pickford.
Wow.
Right. And she was in high demand. So it was like the Wild West, I think, in the sense of so many opportunities for women in the teens and in the 20s. But then when it became more corporate, and I
Mm.
think also particularly during the Depression, as so many men had lost their work, well, um, women were kind of
Pushed
left
aside.
by the wayside. Yeah, I think they were marginalized. I really do, based on the histories that I read. So here we can say, wasn't I fortunate to come of age as a young writer in the middle 80s when as Terry Lewis Fisher, who was my mentor in Cagney Lacey, is a she was the only woman producer on when I came on there, and then she left a year later to co-create LA Law. I think I
Mm.
mentioned that before, right, with Stephen Bochco. But she said, Georgia, and she'd been a lawyer. I mean, she'd been working as a lawyer, and then she worked with her male partner, who was a playwright, Steve Brown, and she wrote a novel. And that's how I think she was discovered for Cagney and Lacey, because
Mm.
her partner was a playwright, she was a novelist, and wanted to bring in both that experience, for the court scenes and so on. And she said, Georgia, right now it's fashionable to hire a woman in certain
Mm.
circles, because certain studio execs or showrunners like to think of themselves as progressive. She said, so the door is opened for us right now.
Mm.
And I said, well, that's wonderful. And she said, yeah, well, it's open.
Huh.
And she actually she had a very mixed experience on LA Law. I mean, it went well the first year or two, it was very successful. And I just know that it was very tumultuous for a year or two after that. And she ultimately left the show. And the last I heard, I think she did come back and do a couple of the movies of the week of Cagney and Lacey, I think, that were done in the 90s. I mean,
Mm.
that was something that I wasn't interested in doing. I was working on all of my own pilot projects at that point. But I think that was the last screenwriting she did. I mean, the
Wow.
last I heard, and I don't know if this is true, but she had become an acupuncturist.
Oh, really?
But I don't know that that's accurate. But I mean,
Yeah.
for some years, I would occasionally see her partner, her ex-writing partner, Steve Brown, at a Writers Guild meeting or something.
Mm.
So several of the women that I work with, Pat Green came on Cagney and Lacey, and she had a very successful career for a good 10 years. She also worked on LA Law. She and I both worked on China Beach different times. Again, that wonderful window of these female driven series. And then last time I saw her was, I think around 2005, and she was leaving the business.
Wow.
and she went back to the East Coast where her family was. So I'm thinking of there aren't many women writers that I came up with actually that are still in the business. One who's just well, she was a few years behind me, but Janet Leahy, wonderfully talented writer who started out as an assistant on, I think it was Cheers, and then went on to Boston Legal and then Mad Men, and she's done many pilots, more than I have, and we're good friends. And I remember over when we're talking next week again. We tend to talk every month or two, just and and she was, yeah, she was also dealing with some frustration about how many pilots that she had written. As I said, more than I, for sure, and because when I moved to teaching, she was still out there,
Mhm.
and she did become a co-EP on Mad Men, but so many of the pilots just not picked up. Well, it's very competitive, period,
Yeah.
regardless of gender. It's just incredibly competitive, but it also depends on who the buyers, who the executives, or the directors or actors with the production companies feel comfortable working with. Yes. So,
Do you think that there was like you said an interesting thing earlier? You said while it's open, while the door is open.
mm,
Do you think that like there was it like waves of like the door is open for women and then it shuts and it's like no depending on who's in charge at what studio, depending on like oh that fad has gone by or something like that? Is it
yeah, I do think, like anything in this business, there are trends and
Mhm,
fashions and doors opening to certain points of view,
mhm,
certain styles of writing. I remember one of my other pilot deals. Was with a production company called Kushner Locke, and it was a dramedy called Vista Clara, and it was magical realism, and it,
mm,
it was a dramedy, magical realism, and I just and it also dealt with a young environmental female lawyer who'd come home at her mother's death, um, and this would have been in New Mexico, and her dead mother was a character, and
mm.
this was right before 6 Feet Under,
Oh
when
wow.
her father became, so I really wanted to write this pilot because it was different from other pilots that I'd written. And as a writer, I wanted to exercise new muscles. I don't only write about feminist social justice issues.
Mm,
I have a broader canvas. I those are things that would be expressed
yeah.
certainly, but in a different way, in a different style, and I would grow as a writer. And I don't know if you remember Leah Thompson from Back to the Future,
Uh-huh.
but she was a feature actress at the time, pretty successful. Her husband, what was his last name? Howard. Um, anyway, he was a feature director as well. They
Okay.
had both committed to the project. So I had a
Wow.
feature director. And that was also one of those years where, as I recall, um, yeah, there were no female leads picked up that year. So the good news now, and you know what? I came across a statistic because of the question you asked. You noticed that there weren't many women writer producers on other 80s TV shows.
Yeah.
And so what I have to say to you is that's something I was not that aware of at the time. I
Mm,
really wasn't. Again, I think it was the naivete of and also just keep my head down and do the work and juggle all these projects and my family and the projects. So I knew that I wanted to uplift women audiences by what we were writing stories of women heroes who could be inspiring that we hadn't seen on TV before. Certainly I hadn't in that way. I mean, this was not Angie Dickinson and Policewoman, who's running around in a tight skirt and high heels. This was a
yeah.
different kind, right? So there was that. I wanted to do that, but I also wanted to do more things. But what I did find out when I did this research for you was that at the time that I was writing in the 80s, only 7.5% of the writers for drama series were female.
7.5%.
So when I say that, you know, every writer has hills and valleys and his career, I
Yeah.
want to say that, and I will tell you before we end today, yeah, about some of the valleys, some of the projects that were, well, you've already heard about some of the pilots and features, but there were several others that were, you know, I was very invested in that didn't come, that were not produced. Let's just put it that way. There was a term, Frank Oz. Oh, was it? I came up when I looked up Frank Oz to share the confession story with you. I saw on his, I'm going to check this for sure, but on his Wikipedia page, he had different categories for like his work as a puppeteer and then his work as a writer. And so, and he had another category called, and I'll confirm this before we wrap, but I think it was called unrealized productions,
Oh,
meaning
wow.
that they had been developed but not produced. And this is very common, as you probably already know through your professors and guest speakers. It is very common in the industry. And of course, there's the heartbreak of it, right?
That's what I wanted to ask you about. Like
Yeah.
like, I mean, how do you get back on the horse after all?
Yeah, right?
And it's like,
Yeah.
like that's so, it's got to be so frustrating to put so much time and
Yeah.
like build these pilots and build these unrealized projects and there like I think about that and I think about that in comparison to like you talk about it was one of your articles you talked about regaining the copyright in writing your own
Yes, yes,
novels
yes,
uh
yes, yes,
it-
yes.
because it feels like there with the unrealized projects you're not you like you're saying Showtime owns the rights to what you wrote on the Emmett Till script and
Yeah,
like there
they own the script. And so the only reason that I was able to produce that script that of course, I rewrote it several times, but the script that I originally wrote based on Tin Wife
uh-huh.
Was because I got the option not only to the book, but I was able to negotiate a deal with the production company that then had acquired ownership of the script. Now I could do that because I had two entities behind me. I had USA Cable and Universal Productions, because at that time, everything Universal Productions did went through, in terms of cable, went through the USA Cable network.
Okay.
That's why I was able to do that. So how does one reclaim that enthusiasm and that commitment to keep writing after these disappointments? Well, you look for new fields to plant your seeds. And so for me, that was novel writing, and also some short story writing. I think I started to mention that one of the two most recent pilots I've written, and these, well, one was spec, that was Little Egypt. And we had some interest, but it wasn't sold. So what I did was I wrote a short story called Little Egypt, which is essentially a prequel to the pilot. And it was published in a noir anthology that Michael Connelly wrote a foreword to called The Last Resort. And in May, I'm actually having a meeting with a podcast company who has read the script and read the short story. And we're having a conversation about whether or not it would work as a podcast.
Oh, wow.
And who knows? I mean, we'll
Yeah.
see. And part of the other seeds in different fields, all based on intellectual property at this point in my life. So I wrote an article called Performance Art that was on the front page of the Huffington Post New York edition. and this was 10 years ago. And my manager is all, she keeps bringing up, she did several times, that she thought it would make a good television film. And I wasn't sure about that, but we got into a conversation a few months back, and we started talking about, again, podcast. And so she went on maternity leave. I went ahead and wrote up the proposal. The proposal went out about 3 weeks ago, and I had a meeting yesterday with Spoke Media, who was interested in the possibility of, can we make this, your article and your proposal, is there a podcast here? Well, we have a second meeting. Well, we'll see.
Wonderful.
We'll see. But they've done some really interesting podcasts like Family Ghosts, and they actually distributed Dirty John, which was produced by Wondery. And of course, that was based on the LA Times article. So these concentric circles of story, and that's something that I do teach in my class. I actually taught a special lecture class on the concentric circles of story, which is that the distribution system changes, but the story can be told through a number of these distribution systems. So let me tell you my big hope right now. I mean, podcasts are hopeful, but one of my favorite scripts ever. This is one of the heartbreaks, the script, but I'm mending my heart through and I have mended it actually just through transitioning it into different stories. So it was called The Good Soldier, and HBO brought me the idea. They had read this first script of mine. Nobody's fool. Another producer had sent them that script. This is like 15 years after I wrote it, and he kept it. And by that time, of course, I always, I was like 5 years out of all, maybe later than that, of all of my later than that. So this was closer to 2000, but all of my China Beach credits, right? And so they brought me an idea. I don't know if you've ever heard of a film called. It was an Australian film. It was about just lost. I'll get it. It was an Australian film about a Boer soldier who was a scapegoat during the Boer War, and he was ultimately executed. And the basic story was, we'd like you to be inspired by this story with a female lead. They they wanted me to write another female-driven story, a female warrior in uniform. And I said, I can do that. I've done it. I can do that. Let me do it again. HBO, absolutely. Let me go in there and see how deeply I can expand this story. So I actually had a wonderful experience working with them. Some of the best notes I've ever received. And I actually got a green light on the project.
Wow.
They were sending it out to cast. And you know where I'm going on this. And then there was an executive shakeup.
Wow.
Right. And it fell into development purgatory. They owned the rights to it. So about 5 years ago, I'm thinking about this project and knowing that it was one of the best scripts I felt that I ever wrote. It's not only, it's in the field, it's a recon mission. That was fascinating to me, but it also much of the story is a trial. It's a court martial. I had never written court martial before. Oh, that was really exciting, and I had some wonderful military sources. Wonderful. I had a great research relationship with a military judge, and several recon leaders that I talked to. I had network that was so helpful in this in terms of the verisimilitude of the script. So, but HBO owns the script. However, I'm thinking, wouldn't this make an interesting limited series?
Yeah.
And I, through the Writers Guild, I have reversion rights, meaning that I could write it as a pilot, as like if I set it up
Uh-huh.
and a company decides to buy it, and they would then pay HBO what they paid me
Mm.
to write it. And I have then writing from HBO. And I have down to the penny what they paid me, not only to write the script, but for my research costs.
Okay.
So I wrote this limited series treatment. And meanwhile, now this is 2016, 2000, no, 17, almost 17. I'm approached to work as a consultant on a podcast called False Idols. Um, and Serial Box is a company that had developed that. So we have a conversation about that, and I said, well, I could do some consulting, but I'm a full-time professor, and so there are certain things I could do in consulting, but we had actually like a full weekend. It was almost like breaking out on a whiteboard, breaking out all stories for the season. So I was helpful, very helpful with that, and then and they had read. I didn't mention this, but they had read my second novel, which was in early drafts then. And this was the story that it's very much family inspired. It's set it intercuts between the past and the present. And it tells the story of the killing of my father's older half sister, because it goes back in time and intercuts between past and present. And so I had sent them an early draft of that to read, and they liked that. And I sent that as an example, a sample, to show them what I could do in developing the limited series narrative, because at that point I knew that what this company was doing was also developing IP books in order to translate to film. It was called Adaptive Studios, Adaptive Books. So they hired me. They hired me to develop the book. So I had a deal. Did I mention that I am optimistic by nature, which is a damn good thing, because I have become a realist through my 35 plus years in this business. I have had to, I tell you that right now. So I wrote, so I finished the first two drafts, and then the executive that I was working with, this is on the book. So we're not talking about screenplay now. We're talking about a 300-page book.
Yeah.
But I had the contract for the book, and to be the pilot, creator, and EP. And if it went to feature, I would be the EP. They couldn't assure me that I would be the feature writer on it, but I would at least be EP on it, because I have all this original material. So I'm finishing the second draft, and then the executive I'm working with is, you know where I'm going.
Yeah.
He's fired.
Yeah.
However, they bring in another executive who had formerly worked at HBO. I had not met him, and so I'm staying optimistic, and also, hey, this was originally an HBO project. That should count for something, right?
Yeah.
And actually, he was a great collaborator to work with. He was very supportive of what I had done. We had a couple of wonderful conference calls, and I'm working on the third draft, and this is in April of 2019. And then I get an email from one of the junior execs saying, Georgia, I need to talk to you on the phone. There are some changes going on at the company. And what happened is the company, Adaptive Books and Adaptive Studios, was dissolved when another company called Mad River came in and took it over. They had 4 authors with deals. I mean, they'd already published half a dozen hardcover books through this. And there were 4 of us who were, they had given me a December 2019 pub date.
Oh.
And so we're waiting. We wait for a good 5 months, my manager and I, in the hope that they will, continue with the book deals. And then we get the word in September of 2019 that they're let me quote here, they're not interested in being in the book business. And so where's the silver lining?
Yeah.
Yeah, where is that silver lining? Right? The silver lining is that all of the rights to the book are reverted to me.
Oh, that's amazing.
That is amazing, isn't it? They just definitely didn't want to be in the book business, So I still have my reversion rights from HBO, thanks to the Writers Guild. I have that original letter, and now I have the book. And so I decided I wanted. Well, I'd never done the final draft on it, So I completed the final draft for me, over the last 6 months, and we started sending it out a couple months ago when my manager got back from her maternity leave. So we're waiting to hear back. I mean, we sent out a letter. I talked to a friend of mine who's a lit agent, and she said, "This is excellent, Georgia, but we're not getting a lot of requests to read it yet. We've only had 2 passes, and 4 people, I guess a total of 5 have asked to read it. So 3 people we're still waiting on. But we sent out 20 queries. So of those, now granted, there was the lockdown. I mean, so there were several agents who had read previous work of mine that said, they were not taking on new clients, or they were, one had just left the agency and shut down the agency. But last year was not a normal year. So that's my my big project hope right now.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah,
Let's see
because
what happens. Yeah.
now is a time that as the world is waking back up from over the last year, and I'm sure that agencies have dissolved, so companies have dissolved, and
Yes.
people
Yes.
have left the industry and stuff like that.
Right.
There will be
Right.
a building back together of things.
Right. So that's it has a new name now. It's no longer called The Good Soldier. I have a new name for it. But so that's where I am. So this oral history you're doing is very much a living, I mean, constantly changing oral history, because I actually have 3 different projects that are out there that are all based on IP. And I think I would say to you, certainly at this point in my career, I would never write anything that isn't based on my own IP.
Wow.
Because I have no control.
Yeah.
Unless I were hired as a consultant, and of course, that would be an honor to be a consultant if I could help shape somebody else's project. Wonderful. But because I had several times the experience of writing the script, and then the company deciding not to pick up the option on the book. And the most recent of that actually was a project called Walking Out on the Boys.
Okay.
And this one I did about 12 years ago. And it was based on a national best-selling book written by Frances Conley. She was literally the first female brain surgeon in the country at Stanford Medical Center. How do they find me for these projects? But they do, And so, but it was a beautifully written book. Again, a New York Times bestseller. And the producer who brought me the project was David Rosemont, and his company was highly respected, Rosemont Productions, in miniseries and TV film work at that time. He was Emmy winning, the company was. So anyway, I did my 2 drafts on it, and this was for Lifetime. And then Lifetime decided they wanted, and they did. They changed the movies. They were no longer doing social issue driven, even if they were female oriented. They were doing more true crime, more sensationalistic, which I think they're still doing a lot of. But there was a time when Lifetime was actually doing a lot of book adaptations. Believe it or not, I remember when they did a miniseries based on Joyce Carol Oates's book.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this was a while back. Yeah, a while back. So, so at the time we were working on it, I thought, wow, this could be done in an interesting way. They were talking about Laura Linney for the lead, and she would have been perfect, just physically, because Frances Connolly, who I talked to on the phone, not only was she a brain surgeon, but she was a gorgeous blonde.
Oh.
And part of her script, her book was about, the trials and tribulations of making it in a man's world. Yes, okay. But also she had just unbelievably, and considering the level of, she's a medical doctor, a PhD, she was sexually harassed by her superior. And Stanford Medical School did not take any action on it. She took
Wow.
a trial. So it was really, so it made a lot of, it made a lot of waves when it was published. And I have all of, she sent me all the court transcripts. She sent me all of this. And it's now in the Writers Guild archives,
Yeah.
because that ship has sailed. I don't own that book.
Yeah.
And I plus I move on to other things right now.
It's like,
Yeah.
with all that, it just,
Yeah.
with the dissolving of companies, and I'm sure it's just a rat's nest of things to untangle it.
Oh yeah. I guess I would say, I guess I'm glad I did it for the Tin Wife that, oh God, they gave it a terrible title when they aired. It was called My Husband's Secret Life. Oh my God. They did it because they took it to, they call them focus groups.
Oh yeah.
Focus groups, right? And the director on the project, Graham Clifford, I will say that he and I were really united in the casting and the editing of it. And we both fought to keep Tin Wife, and the USA's USA's thought process on that was, nobody will know what that means. It's slang for a cop's wife. And
Yeah.
I thought, but if this is properly marketed, people will be intrigued and they will want, and all of that. But so that's why it came out with that title. But yeah, but I guess the good news is it was a kind of sense of satisfaction that after all these years, I did get that story made.
Yeah.
And it was ultimately, I got some great residuals because it was went to video, and because Ann Arthur still had her Oscar nominee cachet. Graham Clifford also, he'd started out in features. His first movie was Frances with Jessica Lange.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, and he had done a really fine job with that. He'd actually started out as an editor. So I think Graham's real gift is an editor, and he brought that to this project. But there was some of the other casting, I won't go into detail on it, but some of the other casting did not work, and because we weren't allowed to go with our first choices for some of the supporting characters. And I think that made a big difference in it wasn't as strong as it could have been, but
Yeah.
at least the story got told. And it was when I came back from that, I heard John Angels was somewhere in there. That was HBO had brought me in for that. You'd asked about that.
Yeah.
And that actually, that was written by a first-time screenwriter who was a civil rights attorney, Jenny Friedis. And it had been in development for 3 years at HBO. And Carrie Putnam was the executive. And because I worked with her on Good Soldier, which, came so close, we had a good relationship. She brought me in and she said, this is, if we don't get this draft right, it's out because it's been in development for so long. So would you be willing to do this? And Jenny had done several different drafts. And my understanding was that I was picking it up from Jenny, right? And so I did several drafts, and on the basis of my last draft, they did greenlight it to production. That was the good news. But then the director brought in her writer to do the next draft. I thought, well, that's okay. I knew that, the chances were being a second, third writer on a project, you don't always get the full credit, but I should at least get a shared credit, or a story credit. And in fact, the company, the production company, did give me that credit. But then it was challenged by a team of writers. Let's see, I'm trying to remember their first name. Was it Eugene? The last name Singer. And they were a husband-wife team, had worked together. I never saw the scripts that they did. I didn't know that there had been a second team on there. I only saw Jenny's draft. Well, and again, this is how the companies work sometimes. I guess the HBO and Spring Creek, which was the production company, had made the decision to only show me Jenny's drafts. I guess because that was the original vision of the script. But the singers had done two drafts of their own, just like I did. But I had never seen them. So when the credits went out, they challenged the credits. And, you know, I had never seen their work, but they were the second. They were the second. So that meant that the third has less chance of having that credit. And then, of course, the director's friend who came in to do the final draft and so on did get a credit. So I lost my story credit on that, which that was very, very disappointing because I had loved writing that project. And I had been able to do some wonderful research. I'd gotten a microfiche from the Radcliffe Library, interviews and written materials from these original suffragists. It was just amazing. You know, that wasn't that wasn't going on location to a Vegas bounty hunters convention. This was I was my college nerd self in the library, just going, this is amazing. You know, so it was it was a very positive experience. Until the credit issue. But again, that is not unusual.
Yeah, that seems like a. Yeah. One of the things I've been told is just to expect that kind of thing. Expect challenging of critics. Expect to be fired off your own stuff.
It's happened. Fortunately, let's knock on wood, shall we? I've never been fired off my own stuff. I have taken my name off. I have stepped back from like the pilot project that I didn't feel. Let's say the rules of the game had changed. Yeah. You know, since I was hired to write that. There was one thing I wanted to say about the rules of the game. Brings you back to because you said your wife. I was very heartened when I read this. You said your wife said that should be like a training film for certain businesses, and so that's a real vote of confidence there, because I have gotten a lot of feedback on that script, and I remember I was on a panel. You know, when a show is very successful, there are a lot of panels done at different conferences and so on, and I was on a panel talking about my projects, and afterwards a young woman came up to walk me down from the days, and she said, well, the rules of the game, that episode, that was really important to me. And well, thank you very much. You just say, oh, thank you. You're liking the writing. She said, no, I mean it. She said, it changed my life. She said, because I watched that show, what you wrote, I knew it wasn't my fault. Wow. That's what she said. And let me tell you, oh, well, what can you say? I'm so glad it helped you in that way. But that was a moment in time for me, because I thought, oh, wow, what responsibility do I have? I want to tell these inspiring stories for women and men, right? But to know that my words made a difference in somebody's life in terms of awakening them to a different sense of how they saw an experience or saw themselves, and I know another writer I read talks about, writers, we at our best, are subversives, because we can help initiate change, and we can do that through comedy or drama. In fact, sometimes it's easier done, through not being, you never want to preach, but what you want to do is just show the mirror. You want to show
Yeah.
these multifaceted mirror. And so that was a very special moment for me as a screenwriter in particular, because it showed me the breadth of the medium, right?
Mm.
The breadth
And the response, like you're in a room writing, you're on set, but you're not seeing how many millions of people are
no.
absorbing your writing.
No, but I will tell you when another wow moment was I'd been asked to speak at a conference at the Australian Film Institute. Well, actually, the conference, there were two different projects, two different events, I should say. It became projects. One was the Melbourne Screenwriting Conference, so I was asked to speak at that. And then when I agreed to do that, I was asked to go on a tour for the Australian Film Institute to speak to in different cities. And let me tell you, I knew that Australia was a continent, but I didn't know how large this continent was. So it was Tuesday, it was Brisbane. If it's Thursday, it's Adelaide. If it's I was exhausted after that trip, but it was also an amazing experience. It really was. And there were and when I was leaving to come home, I remember I was in the I guess it was the Melbourne airport, maybe it was Sydney. Anyway, and I saw on the TV screen some of my work. I mean, one of my episodes from one of my series I saw up there, and it was kind of it was surreal.
Yeah.
It was just surreal. I thought halfway around the world, and
it's played.
yeah, it's and the medium of film, and films are dreams. They're so powerful. Sometimes they're nightmares, but I think they just appeal to that intuitive sense, how we respond to them. When somebody has a really memorable emotional experience, very seldom will somebody say, "Oh, it's just like a novel."
Yeah.
Or it was just like a movie. Because the scenes are being played out and you can't believe they're real, and that could be positive or negative or tragic, right? But I think we do, there is a sense of movies, as they call it, the dream factory. And not like audio, radio, or now podcasting, that's a different experience. It's no visuals, it's all audio. But on the other hand, that can be very intimate. I mean, like Orson Welles, War of the Worlds.
Yeah.
People believed it was coming down, right?
Yeah.
They were here.
We believe we have, it's like we have a relationship. We feel like we have a relationship with people in our ears that are doing like podcast or radio or something like that.
Right.
And the dream thing, this is a tangent, but it's one of my favorite quotes ever is it's an introduction to a book of screenplays that Ingmar Bergman wrote. And he talks about himself as a conjurer, as a filmmaker, as a conjurer, and that while you're watching a movie, and this is the days of film going through the reel, through the projector, and that half the movie you watch is actually darkness, just darkness, and that you're experiencing a movie the same way that you would experience a dream, in that you're in a dark room, that half of it is dark, and these stories are playing in front of you, flashing in front of you, and so he says there's an immediacy to the emotional reaction that happens because you feel an ownership to the dream that you just had. That's right. And I just think of that as such a powerful thing, as such a powerful, like, in that as a writer, like, that means that what images am I flashing in front of the audience? How am I like creating? There's an importance to what I choose to write, how I choose to write, and so that it you portray you put those dreams into people's minds.
You do.
And
You do. I'm going to take a quick break and then I'll come back. But there are two things I want you to. I don't know if you keep a dream journal,
oh no,
but
I do not.
think about it. I always
Okay.
encourage my students to do that. I have done it at different times in my life, and it's. I can't say to you that I've translated any of those dreams immediately to film script, but I will tell you it's been quite a psychologically fulfilling journey because we work out so much in our dreams in terms of what we're dealing with. Trials, tribulations, relationships, joyful, whatever. And in fact, we used to share dreams, my family. I used to ask our daughter and son what did you dream last night? And we would talk about it and process it. And even now, my husband is so patient, because I have very vivid dreams. And so I'll share it with him. He doesn't remember his dreams. And so, and I'll kind of work it out. And sometimes I'll write it down. And I said, and sometimes I'll analyze it. He said the other day, I asked him about if he interpreted something, and he says, I don't know, but it's just always interesting to listen to your dreams because I feel like I'm watching a show or something, So do those, keep, process your scenes. I think it's very helpful for those of us with an active psychic life. And the other thing I want to say to you is what I say to all my friends and colleagues in the business, as well as my students, is before you send anything out, if you can write it as a short story or an essay,
Mm-hmm.
my friend, you will have intellectual property. It does not have to be published, but it does not. A short story does not have to be published.
Wow.
So what you would do, though, it would be very important for you to send it to the Writers Guild. You probably already registered projects there, right?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely do that. So you can't copyright titles or concepts. So you definitely want it to be in the form of at least a short story, or I would say make it a short story. That's what I would say, or an essay. It could be true life essay. You want to do some kind of family memoir or whatever, because when I taught that true story feature class last year, a couple of my students wrote stories based on true events in their family life. Yeah.
Mm. I've got one last question to sort of get some information from you, and then we could, and that could be it. And over the next couple of weeks, I'll get you the material back to you.
Thank you. I just checked, and Frank Oz did call it unrealized projects.
Unrealized projects.
That's what he has on his Wikipedia, and I thought, wow, that's just so interesting. And I'm happy to say that I didn't have to look this up. It came back to me as I was getting some more tea. But the Australian film that HBO had wanted to inspire me, it was called Breaker Morant.
Breaker Morant. I do not know that film.
Yeah, it was. This was an older film. I think it was maybe late 60s or early 70s. I hadn't seen it, but of course, when they told me about it, you can bet I went to get a DVD at the time, and I watched it very closely. So yes, so that was the two things. Oh, and the other thing I want to say very quickly about pilots. If you go in, do you think you will go into the TV business, Galen?
Oh, for sure. My first love is features, but I mean TV. I do love TV, and I love the idea of writing collaboratively, and I love the idea of a steady paycheck.
The idea of what?
A steady paycheck.
Yeah, don't we all? Yeah, I was very grateful for that through the years. Very grateful. Well, you'll find you'll be going into a lot of meetings to pitch a lot of projects, and then when you have an agency, they will bring projects to you. So, for instance, two of the really interesting people that I met. That CA at one point thought that they were going to develop series about were Ann Richardson.
Oh yeah.
Texas. Yeah, I met her. And she's
You
a
did.
firecracker. Yeah, she was a firecracker. And I mean, again, I think they introduced her to a number of their writer
Yeah.
producers, and there was no series that was ever developed with her, which I think was a missed opportunity. Um,
Yeah. Would
but
have been
isn't that a
great.
missed opportunity, right? And the other actress, well, she wasn't an actress, but she was a performer, right? Ann Richards. But
Yeah.
Ellen Burstyn.
Oh, really?
Yes. We actually developed a project together and tried to set it up at the networks. And at the time, I don't know why the networks thought this. I think she had done another pilot or some short-lived series. Um, I guess they just weren't ready to commit to her. And in
Mm.
fact, I have a personal letter that she wrote me after that, just thanking me because she said, it would have been, we could have worked very well together. And for some reason, the networks just were not ready to commit,
Oh, that's such a.
but,
She was
but
so
I had,
wonderful. She was.
she is wonderful, right? I mean, I remember seeing her way back in Last Picture Show. That was the first
Oh,
time I
yeah.
saw her. And she's still doing amazing performances. And but when I deposited a lot of these early scripts to the Writers Guild archive, I have that letter in there. But I mean, I was just thinking about people that I met at different times that really left, um, you know, really left a positive impression. Like, isn't that interesting? I get to meet these interesting people. And you will too. That's the beauty of the business.
Yeah.
The business isn't always beautiful, Galen.
Mm.
Let me say that. And the business is not always kind, but there are so many opportunities that can unfold that truly enrich your life experience. And then you choose who am I willing to work with,
Yeah.
how many times am I willing to say yes or no, or to have to reinforce or restate my boundaries? Is this person being respectful to me? If
Mhm.
not, it doesn't really matter why, does it? It just matters that are you willing to keep working with that person?
Yeah.
And so we discern, and then we decide what's worth it and what isn't.
Hmm.
And Tim Robbins, the actor, writer, director. I heard on NPR an interview with him some years ago, and I always share it with my students. And he said the most important one of the most important words to say in the entertainment industry is no. Yeah.
Wow.
Now we don't feel that starting out, particularly,
Yeah.
and we're
Want to say
looking,
yes to everything.
and
Yeah.
you know what? And we're looking for that steady paycheck,
Yeah.
of course. And we're looking to create relationships, people who believe in our talent and will continue to support our talent and remember us as they move on to another job or another project. But here's this thing: besides your talent, your biggest commodity is your time.
Mm.
Your time. We have one life. One life, unless you believe in reincarnation. But then you'll no doubt be a different person, and there'll be different, transitions at that point. So it really is important to be discerning. And a lot
Mhm.
of that discernment is with the people that you choose to work with.
Yeah.
If there are shared values. Because there's a lot of, I don't know if you've ever seen this series. I'd never seen it before about a month ago. I'd heard about it, of course, but Episodes. Do you know the
Oh,
series
yeah, with
Episodes?
Matt LeBlanc.
Yeah. And one of my friends said, "Oh, Georgia," this is one of my college roommates. "Oh, I'd love to hear your take on that. I bet you could tell me, all the, behind the scenes stuff." And I said, "Oh, I heard of that, but I never watched it." I have been watching it now, for several weeks, and it's like an exorcism every night, because there's,
Really?
well, yes, because I mean, of course, it's extreme, and it's
Yeah.
and it's sitcom, but there's a lot of outrageous stuff, because people with power
Mhm.
sometimes do outrageous things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot played for laughs, and good for Matt LeBlanc, because he's such a good sport through this,
Uh-huh.
but also this sense of he was huge in terms of he could have had any deal he ever wanted. And then he himself was now dealing with the post friends. Like the episode I watched last night was Jay Leno. He didn't want to be second on Jay Leno. And Jay Leno said, yeah, but, and Matt goes, oh, I was always the first on the couch. And Leno says, that was with friends. You're on pucks now, and so, yeah, you play it for last, but it's like, it's that, it's the hills and valleys of the
Yeah.
business. And who's going to stay with you through some of the valleys? Because there are a lot of folks that I'm serious. They won't just say to actors, I'm your biggest fan. They will say that to you as a writer or a producer or whatever. I'm your biggest fan, da, da, da. And they are your biggest fan in that moment. In that moment. As long as that show's a hit, or as long as that project gets picked up, then they be even bigger fans, So, there are stories, a lot of stories to mine in our industry, a lot of stories to mine.
That's a really, really great place that's a really great place to land it. It seems like I was gonna ask you about your philanthropy and your time with the WGA and stuff, and teaching, but I feel like that's a really good place to land it. Plus, it is almost 4 o'clock, so I don't want to take any more of your time. Georgia, you have been the most wonderful person to talk with over the last few weeks. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for wanting to do an oral history on my projects. It's been fun to talk with you. You've asked some wonderful questions, very, very thought-provoking, and actually brought a number of experiences back to the forefront. To tell you the truth, I had forgotten about confessions, and my husband a few days ago said, you want to mention confessions, because I happened to mention, Galen is interested in features. And he said, well, so you're going to tell him about confessions? I thought, I forgot all about that. So you brought a lot of things to the forefront,
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So I wish you happy parenthood. But before that, I wish you a happy end to the end of your first year at CSUN. Yeah. And I'll look forward to the materials you sent me. So thank you.
Absolutely. And good luck with the project that you're running with right now.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate that. We writers always need cheerleaders and inspiration and good thoughts, don't we? We always need that to keep ourselves going. So, and give my best to your wife.
Okay, I will.
I kind of appreciate the little asides. You said, "Oh, my wife like you said this, like that." So, obviously, it sounds like you're a great partnership. So.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think we are. All right. Thank you so much, Georgia.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.